Hey, 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 USU listeners. This is Julie, and I am here with one of my faves. He is a mentor, coach. I consider him a dear friend, someone who is just freaking fantastic and so motivating and inspiring. I'm so excited for you to get to meet Jon Berghoff. So let me tell you a little bit about Jon before we get into this really delicious conversation. Jon is the founder of the Flourishing Leadership Institute. Jon leads a global team of coaches and facilitators who are working to solve what many would consider to be one of the most significant opportunities of our time. It's the opportunity to unlock the collective intelligence, the group genius in our organizations and in our communities in a way that not only creates necessary healing in the world, but ultimately the kind of exponential changes that we must figure out how to deliver. Just to give an example, in the last 12 months alone, this method has been brought into with companies like BMW, Nike, Facebook, and soon to be used with the top trainers at Keller Williams, which has been recognized as the top training company in the world. Jon has become a leader of leaders. Jon Berghoff is also known for developing the LEAF methodology, an approach for teaching leaders the practices of design and facilitation, for unlocking intellectual, social, and communal capital across diverse groups. Twice annually, a growing community of 250 plus LEAF certified leaders come together for shared learning, storytelling, and collectively designing the practices being called upon by leaders of the future. I personally have done this LEAF certification, and it is so incredibly powerful, both for the amazing community, his guidance, mentorship, and just really learning how to derive the collective genius from groups, teams, and companies and how to apply that. Also, lastly, Jon is business partners with Hal Elrod and has developed and creates and has the Best Year Ever Blueprint live event in San Diego every year. That's where we originally met, and that is another incredible event I highly recommend. All right, so to get into this conversation, I'm just going to bring you on, Jon, because I could keep going, but you are freaking amazing. Psyched to have you. Welcome back.
Hey, Julie, thanks for being here. Or wait, thanks for having me. Of course you're going to be here. It's your show, right?
Right.
I'm glad you showed up for this.
So glad you decided to come on today. All right.
What's going on?
I'm psyched to talk to you, man. There's so much to get into here, but I think just for people tuning in who are like, okay, what is all this, like this methodology, what he's talking about, this collective genius, these important aspects about what you hope to add to increase healing in the world. Like, let's just dive into kind of what you do, what you created. Let's get out there in it. Yeah.
Totally. Where do we start? Maybe we just start with like what I did last week or what we're doing this week, right? That'd be a
great.
Good.
Yeah.
So, here's a really good example. So I just got back from Nashville, Tennessee, in case anybody didn't know what state Nashville was in. It was an amazing 4.5 days with a women's group. And this is a newly emerging women's group. And a little bit of backstory. There's a men's group of entrepreneurs, kind of an elite, kind of high level group of guys that have been getting together for 5, 6, 7 years. And it's the name of the group is GoBundance. And that particular group, I know you know a number of the men in that group. It's one of the healthier kind of mastermind peer-to-peer learning communities that I've ever been a part of. And as that group has evolved and grown, there's been a number of very successful women entrepreneurs like yourself who have wanted that group to enable a women's division to launch of the men's group because they've seen all the benefits that group has delivered for a lot of the guys. And so on a lot of levels, it's really a special thing for this group of women to get to come together for the first time, which is what we did last week. And I know it's kind of weird that I'm a guy and I was there to support the launch of the women's group. That's another story. Maybe we'll get into it. But you asked, what are we doing? What's it all about? And last week was a beautiful expression of that. And it was one expression of a group of like-minded, like-hearted women in this case. There were about 45 or so of them that came together to really accomplish two things simultaneously. And one of them was to create value together, right, with each other, for each other, to not only be a support network, but to create opportunities, to give feedback, to hold each other accountable, to share strategies in their businesses. So that was kind of one reason they came together is to create value. And the other reason they came together, which is kind of where things start to get kind of interesting, I guess, with what we do, is to actually shape the future of their very own community. And so during the kind of latter half of the event, we invited them to actually co-create visions and opportunities and ideas for where they want to shape the future of the community. And so it was a beautiful time to just witness what unfolded, Julie. But that was last week, and we could dive into, what does all that actually mean, or what does it look like, or why does it matter? And this week, we've got another amazing experience. Tomorrow, I'm going to go meet up with a company. I don't know yet if I can say the name of the company, so I'll just say it's a company in the cannabis space, and they're growing. They're acquiring other businesses. They're also growing organically, and they're inviting us to help them do what we call a whole system summit, where we put the whole company in a room. Could be a few hundred employees, maybe, in a few months, where over 3 days, hundreds of people all at once are going to co-create their shared vision of the future, which, while they're merging multiple businesses, is a great idea, and it's a great way to do it. So we'll be kicking off that client literally starting tomorrow. So those are some of the types of things that I get to do and that we train others in how to do, and we can unpack those however you want, or not talk about anything else.
Awesome. Well, I think, first of all, I love that your whole focus is really just deriving the future of the community, getting everyone involved, that there is the idea that we all have strengths. We all have gifts and values. And I know that's kind of the cornerstone of Flourishing Leadership Institute, of LEAF, the strength-based philosophy, and maybe just to talk a little bit about it. And I'm thinking, for those tuning in, I know some of my listeners are entrepreneurs or coaches, and some, honestly, I believe, just from the emails I've been getting, are tuning in to really learn how to be their best self. Maybe just to pull back for a minute and talk a little bit about that whole philosophy, and then how people can use that for themselves, and then a little bit about LEAF and how that started.
Yeah, totally. I think a good way to talk about this is to share a couple of what you're starting to allude to, some of the governing principles behind this work. And we think of these principles kind of like, they're kind of like gravity, like whether or not we're paying attention to it. The reason we're sitting in our chairs and not bouncing off the ceiling is because there's certain principles at play. And what we're really interested in is enabling in groups. And I think a lot of this will apply to someone, even if they don't do work with groups, or it might get them curious about leading groups. But what we're really interested in is, how do we enable within a group the ability to kind of unlock the collective genius, or the group genius, so that group can create the kinds of changes to capture the opportunities, or that they're really wanting to enable. And in order to do that, what we've discovered is that for a group to do that in a natural, healthy, rapid way, we have to unlock strength at 3 different levels. So can I talk about that for a minute?
I was just going to say, can you talk about that? And
okay, great.
Yeah.
So in these separately, these are obvious, but what I think we've noticed is that there's so much that's been said about being a leader, a manager, a coach, a consultant, that is helpful and important. But unfortunately, Julie, and I know you know this, you're so close to this, that so much of what we're currently doing when we're trying to help a group of people is still being guided by ways of thinking that were born literally in the industrial age. And even our best attempts and our best efforts to help people, unfortunately, we're still viewing a group of people more so like a machine than we are like a true living system. And so, our passion at FLI is, how do we bring the true science that, in a lot of this, has only emerged in the past decade or two. So in a historical perspective, it's all a brand new understanding of the science of what's going on in a living system, right? So when you alluded earlier to strengths, we can learn a lot just looking in nature. And so back to this idea that we want to unlock strength in 3 levels. So what we've discovered is that the truest, most natural, organic way to bring the best out of a group is to understand that these things, they have to happen. And the crazy part is they need to happen simultaneously. And that's what we teach is, how do you unlock the capacity, the strength, the wisdom, the intelligence, the beauty, the good at these three levels simultaneously. So here's what the three levels are, and they're almost self-evident, but how to do it is another thing. So the first level is individually, right? And like, if we just pause for a second, like you in your first book, getting a PhD in you, I was such a huge fan of it, as you know, on many levels, because you really invite people to ask the kinds of questions to allow them to go from, not just disengaged in their lives, but let's be real, like, at our worst, we're demoralized, right? And we all have to have the tools as individuals to go from demoralized to not just engaged, but to thriving, to absolutely alive, right? And so we have to have methods that allow people individually to be their very best. And it's one of the things I've loved about your work, and you are also taking it into groups too, which is cool. The second level where we need to unlock this strength is relationally. Because it's one thing to have a whole group of people that are becoming empowered, but if we're not empowering what happens when they're eye to eye, we miss the whole thing. In fact, our work is based on this premise, and this is not controversial, but it's contradictory to what a lot of people might think, that we actually have to unlock our ability to relate before we're going to get people to thrive individually in group settings, because the relationships are everything. And we have to know how to do that, where people don't just go from playing nice, because we can all pretend to be getting along. But at worst, relationships are often toxic, unfortunately. And so at best, there's dramatic safety, total unconditional psychological safety. So how do we enable groups of people to feel psychological safety? And we can talk about this if we want, but we can design it, we can engineer it. And there's a ton of great research on like how this is literally the number one determinant in the ability for a group to function together. But most of that research, the large majority, it doesn't come with the answers on what to do. That's part of what we specialize in, is how do you practically actually do it? And then the third level where we have to unlock strength would be collectively. Right? And these don't all happen just by accident. There has to be a sensitivity and awareness to how a system of people work together to unlock them all simultaneously. So the bad news is I just said a lot of things that might sound important, and then it leaves us all thinking, how do you do it? The good news is doing it is it's fascinating how simple it can be. And so, I just wanted to acknowledge that when you ask about strengths within a group, we really need approaches that understand the science of a system and how to unlock those simultaneously. And if I can finish by saying there's about 5 or 6 principles that govern the how. The first 3 principles reveal, like, to us, the truth of how to do it. And this will finish by getting to, I think, the source of your question. So our work and everything we do is based on the first principle, which is that the greatest source of change in a group, the most focused way to create change, is to change the conversations. And the fastest way to create change within those conversations. So the source of change is one of our first principles that we really dissect. The second principle is what we call the speed of curiosity. And it's the idea that the fastest way to change those conversations is to change the questions that we're asking. And the third principle is what we call the strength of nature. And this gets back to what you asked, and that's based on the idea that if you look outside, everything grows towards the sun, and we call that the heliotropic principle. I actually wrote about this in the book chapter that you graciously invited me to contribute to your last book. And the heliotropic effect is the simple idea that in life, everything grows towards that which gives it more life. So if the conversations are the greatest source of change and new questions are the fastest way to do it, the next thing we have to do is design the types of questions that invite us to come alive. And whether we're working with a group or someone's just thinking about this as an individual, this can be really helpful. So when we can get into the other principles and some of the more how-to, but I'm going to stop at this. That was a really long answer to a great question, I thought.
That is this is awesome. We will have, just so for those, I know those that are driving, do not stop and take notes. I will have this in the show notes. Also, Jon, you did a beautiful job. The last chapter in my book has this really mapped out incredibly well. And, I have to say, being somebody who for many of us that want to have, like you said, the words thriving, to be alive, I don't know many human beings that don't want to feel good and thrive and feel alive and feel like they're doing well in life. And to me, what I love about this and what you just said is you could take this in your office, in your team, in your work, in your business. You could also take it with your families, or you could
Totally.
take it on the individual level, asking new questions of yourself. Talk a little bit. I know that you've also used this with families, and I know you're going to be doing an event soon that is focused on family. That's an interest of mine as well. Oftentimes we kind of overlook that. I know I can. Just curious how you've seen this work in different kinds of systems, being family, communities.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so, and my wife and I have 3 young kids, a 9-year-old, a 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old. It literally every time, I could be wrong, by the way. When I stop and think of how old are they, I don't know if you can relate to that. I'm like, shit, I don't know. There's 3 of them by now. I don't even know how old I am. Have you ever?
Yes, I know. I'm like, I don't
relate to
know.
that. I literally forget things.
I know. And they have the best names, by the way. Your kids have like the greatest names that mean cool
yeah.
stuff.
So our oldest, Ace, he's 9, and then Sierra is 8, and then Kaizen is 5. And so the family is a really interesting example. And I'll talk about this particular event coming up. The family is a really interesting example of, earlier, I'm sure I talked about the idea of a living system.
Yeah.
Right. Or systems thinking, or a complex adaptive system. Like if you study this stuff, what's really interesting is that could sound really far out there. Like, what the heck is this all about? The interesting thing is every single one of us has an intense immersion experience of what it means to be a part of a system, right? Like any group of people will actually be governed by these principles that are existent in any living system, whether or not we know it. And the family unit is the most common experience of a living system that we can all relate to. And anybody who's reflects on any family experience, anyone that I've ever met, would share that it's not always rainbows and unicorns, right? I could speak for myself.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things about that example is it reveals one of the most important lessons about a system. And it's the lesson that in a system, it is the norm to have collective consequences that no individual ever intended on creating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, a family could feel dysfunction, and is probably a good chance that no one in that family is waking up thinking, how can I create more dysfunction today in my family, right?
Usually.
I mean, that could be the case, but more often than not, it's just a good example that anytime you have a group of people, and then we're not even talking about families anymore, you're just talking about work, you're talking about teams, you're talking about communities, you're talking about any group that convenes together. Dysfunction, unfortunately, is kind of common. And if you look at this on a macro level, you don't need all the data. I mean, I could share some data with you it's kind of disheartening. Right. You don't need it. I can walk into the coffee shop below our office right here and ask 10 people, tell me what you think about, and I could name any institution, right? The grandest examples of human systems, and whether it's education or government or business or, I mean, you just healthcare, 10 out of 10 people would tell you they're all broken, right? Which is why at the beginning of this show, I really believe it's true when people look at this work that we do and they say this could be one of the most important opportunities of our time. If someone's a coach or a consultant or a forward-thinking leader, to develop the capacity to enable a group to come alive fast, so to solve their biggest problems quickly and naturally by unlocking collective strengths, because we need it. There's a lot of good in the world right now, and there's a lot of opportunity to figure out at scale how to help groups to come alive, whether it's through a team, an organization, a learning community, a mastermind community like many that you and I have been a part of, a seminar, a retreat. All of these are vehicles to do this work. And so next month is an example. We have this Front Row Family Summit is the name of it. And a quick backstory, this event started 3-4 years ago. I've lost track. And the Front Row Foundation is a wish organization that you've been a big supporter. I've been a big supporter of for many years. And a number of years ago, they said, well, hey, let's use this approach that we've been talking about here. And instead of having 5 or 6 or 10 board members come together, let's do whole system strategic planning, which is the textbook term for this. And we just did this a few months ago for Austin, the Austin chapter of Habitat for Humanity, where they called us up and said, hey, we're going to put not just our board in the room, but all of our advisory board and our staff and all of our supporters and some of our beneficiaries. And so instead of 15, they had 55 or 65 people in a room for a day, where we come out at the end from scratch with a strategic plan that was co-created by the system, which is so, 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 so important. And so the Front Row called us years ago. And for the last 3 years, we've converted their annual strategic planning summit into this whole system retreat where, and it's really evolved because the second and third year, it grew to where we had 50, 60, 70, 80 people show up. Last year, we not only had, I think, 85 adults, but half of them brought their kids.
Wow.
So that while the adults are having this retreat right next door, and there's a group called Fambundance, which is actually an offshoot of the GoBundance group, the same one that just launched, enabled the women's GoBundance group to launch. Because part of what the men's group has been inspired by in the last 3 or 4 years is how do we bring the best of what we're learning when we're together to these other places in our lives, families being one of them. So we've actually partnered with Fambundance.
Awesome.
It's led by Brother James and Mike McCarthy, and they are coming into the Front Row Family Summit, and they lead an experience for the kids while the grown-ups right next door are having a simultaneous retreat to become their best selves. That's the first half of the whole experience. That's basically day one. And then day two, we actually all come together to shape the future of the charity, where we literally will have 70, 80, 90 people doing strategic planning. And it could sound crazy. And if you've never seen it or don't know how that works, it could sound messy. And it is, but in a beautiful way. It's a progressive, cool way to do this. And I don't know when the show will release, but I don't know if we've sold out this event yet. But depending on when this releases, they should hit us up because if there's spaces, it's hosted in the Cuyahoga National Park.
Oh, wow.
So I and Johnny V, John Vroman, his family, many of our closest friends, we'll all be there for 2.5 days. It's very intimate, and it's a beautiful setting, and it's truly a retreat where we become our best selves, and we help this Wish organization to become its best self simultaneously, which is radical. It's kind of a crazy thing to do.
So awesome.
It's July, and I just realized I should give the dates.
Yeah.
And I don't even know. It's July 21st, 2nd, and 3rd. I'm going to look that up while we're talking, and I'm probably going to correct myself in a second here.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because I think, and we'll talk about LEAF in a minute. I know that one of the groups we're meeting again. Yeah.
Later that week. Yep, that's right.
Week.
Those are the right dates.
We'll make sure to air this beforehand. So those listening, even though we're recording a little before then, we'll air it so you can sign up, and I'll have the info. Yeah, Jon Vroman has been on here. I mean, we're a huge fan. Oh my gosh, the Front Row Foundation. I just love how you went into systems, because I'm thinking for people listening, it's like, okay, systems, that sounds a little bit, like you said, far out. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute, we're all part of systems. It's just a fancy word for community or group or collective.
Exactly.
A fancy pants word, kind of a
yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that we can all benefit from is understanding some of the most fundamental things that are happening within a group of people, right? A group is the simple answer, and if we start getting into the science and the research, we start talking about human systems. But it's just a group of people,
right?
If you think about it, as soon as you say a group of people, it's literally, for many of us, it's everything we do every day,
right?
2 or more of us equals a group of people, and one of the most important principles to this work, we talked about the source of change is the conversation. The speed of curiosity is how we do it.
Yeah.
The strength of nature helps us design the questions. The next governing principle is how do we choreograph the way we move groups through these conversations? Now, here's the deal. Anybody, I think, could learn from this lesson here. And that lesson is in understanding how the number one determinant to the quality of any interaction with any group of 2 or more is how safe people feel, psychological safety. And I know I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
And we design that when we facilitate group interactions. This is what we teach our leaders and coaches, is how do you engineer connection and inclusion so that as fast as possible, all eyes have seen all eyes. But it's all predicated on one question that every single one of us is asking at some level every time we walk into a room. And the question is, can I be myself right now and still fit in? And I think that's an important practical reminder for all of us that it's not about knowing that we are asking that question, but it's about remembering that others are asking that question.
Yeah.
And asking ourselves, what can we do so that whether it's a one-to-one conversation or it's a small group or there's 1,000 people in a room, what can we do to invite people to feel comfortable being who they are? because the faster we all realize that being who we are is not just a nice to have, but it's a necessity, right? Because whatever makes us uniquely us is what's going to make this conversation as beautiful as it can be. It's what's going to make a group interaction as healthy as it can be, is leveraging the diversity of that group, right? We're not trying to unify, but unite what makes us different, and then play with that and have fun with that. So, that's what's most exciting about this work. And it's why simultaneously all three of these things can happen, is because, again, you look in nature thrives because of its diversity, not in spite of it, right?
Absolutely.
And we got to figure out in any group, how do we continually invite, and elevate what makes each person individually and then collectively different and unique. It's super important.
Oh my gosh, I'm sitting here like, I got chills. This is like my favorite conversation. It's the whole point for me with the USU. It's like, if everyone tunes into from this space of, like what you said, being yourself and knowing that that's okay. So before that is, how do we design conversations around that?
Yeah.
What I've seen, what I love about this work, and what you do, and what I'm learning is, when you have that psychological safety and people feel they can be their me, USU, their highest self, their best self, then you can really create something, as you said, from the diversity, which I love. And that, to me, it shouldn't be so radically different, but I feel like that's a new paradigm in a way. I mean, I feel like, I know when I was with a Fortune 500 company for a long time, great experience, yet it was so much about like fitting in and doing the same thing. It didn't feel like as much of a focus on the diversity of each person's strengths. And I love the aspect that nature kind of tells the story here. You can look to nature to see it's actually, when you take from all of the different aspects, that diversity is what builds the strength. And
it's so important. I'll give you two examples. Like, if we just go back to last week and this week, of where honoring and leveraging and bringing to life the diversity of a group is so mission critical. So last week was what we call, and there's different labels for this, and I've used all of them, but like a peer-to-peer learning community. I like that label because it's calling it what it is. A lot of people call it a mastermind group, which you either know what that is, or it sounds like some sort of like evil, thing.
like,
kind of a funny name. Yeah, exactly. It sounds like something from Austin Powers, right?
Right. In your mouth.
Our mastermind group will conquer the world.
Right.
It's a funny name. If you don't know the meaning of it, it's kind of funny. Anyways, so in these peer-to-peer learning community mastermind groups, learning environments, it's such a great example where so many of us walk into these environments, even those of us that are very confident in who we are, and we all will hold back on some level until we feel safe, right? Yeah. And so part of our goal is, how quickly can we invite people to feel safe? And I mean, I give you a list of 30 things that we do within the first couple hours. But part of, like, here's one example, is we have everybody sharing with each other. Now, you'll love this, the story of you, right?
Oh my gosh.
And
Right.
when the way that we do it is, we have everybody getting into small groups, and there's literally a conversational choreography to this. So I might make it sound simpler than it is, but the essence of it is simple. So we have everybody get into groups, and there's prep beforehand, but they get in these groups of 5 or 6, and they share the story of you. And the instruction we give everybody is, you've just got a few minutes to share the story of you. You can start where you want, end where you want, but share the story in a way that helps us to reveal your greatest strength and the most important life lesson you've learned. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, that exercise, having the whole room do that, and then afterwards, we actually had the ladies last week, they vote up. Okay, now that we've heard a bunch of these stories, and we did this a day into the retreat, so they'd gotten to know others through a very similar conversation as well. They now vote up, which of the stories have I heard that I think the rest of the group really needs to hear? And so how do we decide who to put on these panels for the rest of the retreat? We let the system determine, after it's getting to know itself, who in here has the strengths that we need to lift up for everybody to hear, because I may have heard about them through these small pockets of conversations. And I will tell you, those panels, and we brought in billionaires literally as keynote speakers last week, wonderful people. We brought in Cody Sanchez, who's an incredible, incredible woman, entrepreneur and investor. She's got I think it's the biggest private equity fund in the cannabis space, and she's such an incredible contributor to this community. And as great as she was, and our other contributors were, bringing in the voices from the group themselves
Yeah.
was one of the most important things to do through their stories that reveal their unique strengths. And what was so cool is as each of these women shared their story, you could almost see in real time them realizing that the very thing that they may have previously felt judged for or even ashamed of,
Yeah.
they were realizing through how the group reflected back their appreciation that that was the thing that made them shine.
Yeah.
And so that was last week in a learning community. This week in an organization, we're going to be planning out how do we put the entire organization in the room, because the purest way to figure out what our truly shared purpose and vision and mission, and to create strategy that's as healthy as possible and that has as much buy-in as possible, is to have the whole richness of everybody in the organization in the conversation, right? Like the fastest way to design, whether it's a product or the future of a company or a culture or anything, is not to ask people what they want and then somebody else designs it. It's for the customer and the designer to be the same person simultaneously. And that's what we do in these settings where communities and companies are designing their future. And again, it's the diversity, right, that allows the healthiest stories to emerge. So I just wanted to magnify that because it's so important.
That's so awesome.